Okay. And we're live. Okay. Welcome back to the Mind Meld PR vlog. I'm your host, Jonathon Narvey. And today we're going to be talking about how to turn a tech founder into a thought leader. And I have a very special guest with me today. Sonya Pelia is a marketing executive in Silicon Valley. Welcome, Sonya.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and I'm so happy to be on here talking about one of my favorite subjects.
Fantastic. Full disclosure, we have worked closely together in the past, and I hope to work with Sonya again at some point in the future as well. I'm just going to shut off all my Slack tabs because I think you probably heard that little sound in the background, that little chirp. Okay, that's all done. And hopefully that wasn't anything too important. Okay, how to turn a tech founder into a thought leader. There's a number of aspects we want to talk about today, why you would want to do this in the first place, how it gets done. We want to talk about, looking at earned opportunities versus paid opportunities and the pros and cons of each. So there's so much we can talk about today. Before we get into the topic though, Sonya, could you give maybe your origin story? Tell me why you are the expert for this topic.
Well, I have actually done this, turning the CEO or the tech founder into a thought leader 3 times. And so I know what is the good, the bad, and the ugly of earned and paid media and doing and the challenges thereof. And I think there is a place for each of them, but I think in the end, earned media is just heads up above doing paid media. There are challenges, of course, with both sections, but the last experience I had with you, I thought was just extraordinary, and I thought there was a lot to be learned from that. And so I'm really happy to talk about my side of what we experienced when you did the earned media program with us when I was at Seraps.
I am so stoked to hear all the nice things you're going to say. So this is great. Let's define some terms to kick off. Actually, this is something I've covered in past Mind Meld PR vlogcasts, is what is thought leadership. And it's all about, well, number one, the tech founder or stakeholders within the company who are high up tend to be people who didn't just start a company to make money, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they often started it because they wanted to change the world in some way, drive it forward, often with leading edge technology. And they have interesting ideas. And so I see my function, my role as helping that person who has ideas, but may not have marketing expertise, may not know quite how to connect their ideas with the outlets where those thoughts would be welcomed by an audience. It's my job to help channel those ideas and find a home and help those ideas find a willing audience. I think we're on the same page here.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think you already laid out 2 of the key pieces that someone like you as the PR person does. Number one is bring the ideas to a much wider audience, a more general audience, number one. And number 2, what you mentioned was also that how do you position those ideas? Just because one has some brilliant idea about changing the world or tech that's much better than any other tech out there, doesn't mean you necessarily have the talent to translate it into understandable terms for other people.
And I love that you brought that up because it's something that, I mean, it goes to the heart of marketing in general. Is you're telling a story, because let's face it, for any product or service out there, there's probably, if it's profitable, there's going to be competition out there. And how do you differentiate yourself? So that's one aspect of it. But sorry, I think I interrupted you as well. So we were talking about the why of thought leadership. Any other thoughts there?
So the 2 points that you made, I want to add a third point to it, is that you want to get a wider leadership, because in the end, it's not just you're selling to a narrow niche, especially if you need to be a thought leader in that space. You also need to educate people about what your solution is. And what happens is, I think when you are looking only at paid media, usually you end up in a very narrow channel. You don't get to, for example, the wider publications out of the space of that particular technology. And to build a big company or to build a very successful company, you've really got to get out. And, for example, if you were in the tech space, then Wired magazine would be a great publication to aspire to, but it's not that easy to get in there. Or even being in Entrepreneur magazine, or being in some of the magazines that are now proliferating on the internet. And it's really important to have this vast coverage versus just a narrow space, which happens mostly with paid media.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent overview, I feel like, of what you're looking to do with thought leadership in terms of reaching that audience. Let's go a little bit away from a tell and to a show. And again, I'm very eager to hear what you have to say about your experience with how we developed the thought leadership for a Silicon Valley founder.
So when I think about the way you made this plan, and it was in several layers, which I thought brought a lot of discipline to establishing the thought leadership piece. I think when you do the earned media, you're really limited to the opportunities that are in that space. Whereas what I felt, and I'll give you a really interesting example, a lot of tech founders become part of Tech Forbes Council, but they don't have the time or the bandwidth to be answering the questions on a regular cadence. So even though the knowledge comes from the founder or the tech expert, you were there as the facilitator to make sure that the things were being answered in a timely manner, in a cadence that really helped pump content out, valuable content out. Then the second part was the PRs that you established as a part of the breaking stories, and always trying to find the hook. Now, in a startup or in a small company, we have 50,000 tasks we are trying to do, and the squeaky wheel gets the oil at that moment. But having you on the team was, you were always on the lookout for what are the stories that our story could connect up with. And that added PRs that were very relevant. They weren't just the old style PRs where you issue a PR every week and you blast it out to 5,000 newspapers, and then there's no feedback or pick up on it. And then the third part I thought, which was really excellent, and which was incidentally my favorite part, which was becoming a part of these articles which had multiple experts from different tech founders, experts from different industries, but really talking about company building and talking about leadership building and how to build teams. And as we proceeded in the relationship, I just found this additional layers which I'm not sure would have been possible to do them just from us driving them.
Well, it's very generous of you to say so, and really that is that is a big part of the job when you whether you're representing a company internally or externally, doing public relations work. You have to understand the buck stops with you. Actually, you have to take ownership of that role, and that means to any extent possible, you want to be a facilitator. Because again, you're channeling the thoughts and the big ideas of the founders and the expert stakeholders on the team, and you may not be the expert yourself, or at least it's something. If you start doing PR for any kind of company, let's say you're taking on a new industry, you're going to learn a lot, and over several months, you may become something of an expert, at least enough to sort of fake your way through a conversation. So as you get more familiarity with a company and an industry and a technology, you can, it's up to you to figure out where are these opportunities. Is here's a story I see a reporter is asking for, and whether it's a proactive opportunity, and they want you to submit something for a story, or you're writing an essay that will be published somewhere. You want to figure out not only how you can best answer that publication's questions, but how you can also steer the conversation in a certain way. So you get to answer the question that you wish had been asked. And in that way, you get to share your particular insights that they might not have known to ask for.
Yes, and I think having somebody in this role who is outside, and this is another value point that I wanted to mention to you, which I thought was super valuable, because I had done PR myself at another company. But, you know, when you're in a company and you're working within a company, your horizon is limited and it's narrow because you're always looking for that space. But when you have somebody who's like you as a PR consultant or an expert outside, you're looking at a much wider playing field. And honestly, some of the opportunities that you brought, I wouldn't have even considered those, or wouldn't have even found those, right? And because you became an expert in what we do and got to know the CEO and myself, you were able to give us a very interesting opportunities where either we commented on some kind of challenge in leadership, for example, remote working teams, right? Or we actually gave in-depth answers on, how do you build a company in this time where everyone's working remotely. So what I thought was that was really valuable, this expertise that you were bringing in, because you were looking at other clients and your clients in different areas, and then sort of adding value to us. I don't know if you thought about it like this, but that's how I started actually viewing it very quickly soon after we started working together.
Well, I'm not sure if this is something that all PR companies do, but it's certainly something that they should be doing. And I don't mean to toot my own horn, but since you brought it up, the way I think about this is, number one, I'm an opportunist, and I like to think in terms of strategy, but at heart, I know that I'm somewhat of a tactical person. I'm looking for quick opportunities, and if I see something is working with another client in terms of how we're able to make the news and get reach, I will use that absolutely across the board with any client, because it's a win-win-win. It's also like bigger picture. This has to do with major breakthroughs, whether we're, if you're talking about, let's say, science, climate science, getting insights, big insights into fields that just hadn't been considered before. The only way to do this is through cross-pollination of ideas. So with climate change, it's a group of scientists with an understanding of weather patterns, geology, biology, history, archaeology are actually going to have deeper insights into the impacts of that kind of phenomenon than individual scientists working alone. So I guess my point being, it's not just individuals, creative individuals drawing from multiple strains. It's working as part of a team. Working with you and with the founder was just it was such a learning experience for me, and every day, every week there was something new. I'm not saying all of our ideas were winners, but I think a lot of them were. So,
they were, and you have to test and try, and especially when you're establishing somebody as a leader in that space, there's a lot of fail fast, right? We write something out, you explain it in a way, and then push it out and see if it gets traction, and then learn from there. But I also wanted to point out to you an interesting thing that I realized, that I pride myself on writing well. I'm a marketeer, I was a technical writer, I write very directly, and yet I realized that when I'm writing about things that I'm immersed in, I write as if everyone should know them.
Mm.
And one of the really interesting experiences with you was that you would take the sort of technical way we spoke or we talked about, and then you actually correlated it to how people would speak in the normal world.
Mm.
And I think sort of translating it for us, for me, I think it made me realize that how much of our own technology we speak and breathe, and we don't realize that this is how we're presenting ourselves, right? And so I think, to me, if you're so close to the matter, and I think before the call I was just mentioning this to you, that I've become a part of another of a startup accelerator. And we had our first session yesterday, and one of the founders, he presented a slide deck to me, and it was actually really well done. But I want to tell you, at slide 11, I couldn't figure out who the customer was.
Mm.
And I think it was so obvious to him who the customer was and who he was going to speak to. But and that's, I think I realized at that moment that perhaps many times when my ex-CEO and we talked to you, probably that's how we came across, is that we talked in all of this techno babble, and then you would make it into English. And it never struck me how much of that technology we speak in.
That is an excellent point, and it's something that is a crucial hurdle to get over if you're trying to put your ideas out there. And I'm not just talking about thought leadership, although that's the central focus of this conversation. But this is a human problem. Like I remember, you didn't know me when I was a younger man, but I used to have a bad temper. And it was because I wasn't understanding, other people didn't know what I knew, and I didn't know what I thought what I thought I knew was, not necessarily true. And, being able to understand, if you want to get your ideas across and persuade people and not frustrate others and frustrate yourself constantly, take the time to figure out how to put things forward in a way that people will understand, using anecdotes and metaphor and playful language, but without being pedantic, without being boring, just in a plain speaking, as quickly as you can, but not so quickly that you skid past important points. You're getting those ideas out there. So there's that. I think this is, some good rules to follow. I'm not sure if there's a particular example you were thinking of where, let's say, a piece of thought leadership that went from some early, fairly technical conversations to something that was, you read it and you're like, oh, this just, it flows off the page, and this is easy to understand for even if you're coming to this topic for the first time.
I have an example. It was the one that I think when you presented my selling product-led growth, where the customer advocacy and the customer success was really critical. And I remember when you asked me to write a draft or bullet points. This is how always we worked, right? You asked for bullet points. And, I wrote bullet points I thought were very clear. And then when you wrote it out, I was like, whoa, this is completely different than what I said. And it sounds so much easier to understand. And, for a moment I thought, oh, this is too simplistic. And I want to tell you, I think that article had over 100 shares in a day when it was published on one of the marketing websites. And, I read it again after a few days after it had been published. And I thought, see, that's the difference of getting somebody who's a professional PR person to write, take your ideas and then present them in a really easy to understand way. And it did take me aback. And that's when I really started connecting the dots on the work we were doing together and saying, that's the value, because I had done the paid media myself. And the paid media, I wrote them, I ghost wrote them for the publication. Well, I clearly wrote what I knew of the technology. I was not making them, the ideas, simplified or accessible. And
Hmm.
at that time I thought I was doing a really good job, but then now I've realized that how important this earned media piece is, and have somebody who can actually translate your ideas into something that other people can read and understand.
Well, I think you're being maybe a little bit too generous there, in that, like, I remember reading your early drafts and thinking, wow, there's really not much left for me to do here. So, and that really is, like, the best kinds of thought leadership is truly a channeling of ideas. It's I get how reporters think and editors think, and so I know how to streamline a sentence, or connect the dots in a way that they'll get it. But I'm not fundamentally changing your ideas.
No,
I'm
no,
making them more.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So yeah, if I have occasionally, early on in my marketing career, I would. I'm not going to name any names or any companies, but there were times when I would be working for companies, and this was so early on that I don't even think thought leadership was a phrase that was
Mhm.
that I was using. Um, but if I had been using it, I might have thought, to get thought leadership, we need some initial thoughts, and not from me, because I'm not the first person you go to explain this technology. We really, it works so well. I've been so lucky to work with so many founders who have genuinely interesting and new things to say,
Mhm.
that even if they get technical, that's where I can help. But
Right.
ultimately, we're not starting from scratch here. Yeah.
No, but I think there's this idea of translation of complexity into simplicity so everyone can understand what you're doing, right? And I think all companies, when you're selling a solution, you're going to get a bandwidth of people. There's going to be, so I work in tech. I work in high tech. So for us, you will get the really seasoned IT person who will immediately get what you're talking about. But then there'll be people who are junior and may not understand unless you explain it correctly. And then there are people who are on the periphery who need to know what the value of this solution is, and they're not technical at all. But if you keep speaking in technical language, you're going to pass them by.
Yeah.
So you're not going to be influencing people who may read this interesting article about a solution that they will use, but they don't need to implement it because the implementation is going to happen by the IT department.
Right.
And so
Right.
for me, that's always the thought process, that how do I influence a decision maker who needs the solution, and has nothing to do with implementing it themselves, right?
Right, right. I feel like, to take an example from outside of PR and more in pop culture. You go back a few years, the first Toy Story movie from Pixar.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it works on multiple levels. Kids appreciate it. They get the simple story, but adults love the dialogue and the complexity of the interactions between Buzz Lightyear and Woody. and it's just in that way. I think the best pieces of communication, whether it's an essay or a video, or they can work on multiple levels.
I think when you are too close to your work, and when
Mm,
you're close to what you're working on or developing, sometimes it's very hard to see that.
mm.
And I, we are so passionate about our subjects, and especially tech founders who have this amazing solution. And I work in tech, and I'm also so passionate, and I know I can see people's eyes glazing when they ask me, what does my company do? And that's when I've started to now realize that you do need somebody who's going to translate where necessary and polish it up, and then make it so that you can explain it without condescending to the reader. And
Mm.
there's a fine line between condescending to the reader and explaining it so the reader gets the analogy. And I think you mentioned that a couple of minutes ago, is that to find the right connection so people can understand what you're talking about and connect it to explanations that make sense and
Right.
say, aha, that's what you mean to do with it. Yeah.
Right, right. Um, that's an excellent way to I guess to summarize how that works, I want to touch on something that we've sort of glazed over a little bit, and that is how you use thought leadership in marketing. So how this ties in. So I'll lay this out. If all we were doing was, doing some research, figuring out publications where we could find opportunities to channel these ideas, and then we wrote these up, we submitted them, they get in, and then we just said, okay, done, job done. And you would just point to those published articles. It wouldn't, that's actually not the end of it.
No, that's the beginning. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the beginning, right? I think, to me, having these kind of earned media articles where you're showcasing your knowledge, you're sharing your lessons learned, and showcasing how other people can be successful, and giving these tips, it goes a long way in building credibility for the CEO and the company and the brand. It's really brand building, and the brand of the CEO, brand of the company, and the leadership team there, number one. Number two is it also provides the kind of trust that you build in your customers, not just credibility, but trust. And they say, they come to your website and you have all of these articles linked on your website, for example, or shared on your company's social channels. And they can see that you're a trusted authority in this space. So, they will trust you, and perhaps buy your product, or even reduce your sales cycle. But the other opportunity is, which I think is really an important piece, and which I know that you've done with your other founders that you've worked with, is to establish them to influence others, which is in conferences. There's a reason why so many tech founders write books about the technology they invented with a writer. There's a reason they sort of the writer is the one who sort of translates those complex ideas into ideas that we can all understand. And it's interesting, I've been talking to CEO, and I was talking to him about 3 different books in the marketing space, in the SaaS product-led world space. Every book had a co-writer. So it was the CEO or the co-founder of the technology plus a writer. And you can only influence others when they can understand your ideas. And that's what gives you the opportunity to be on panels or webinars or conferences and say, this is what the technology does, this is a solution, this is the problem we are trying to solve. And if you don't speak it simply, people are just going to go over their heads, and you're not going to be that influencer, that person who's shifting the marketplace along with you.
Yes, very much so. And I'm cognizant that you've been very generous with your time, but I still have one big topic that I want to cover here, and that is your experience with earned media versus paid media. Maybe you could delve into pros and cons of each.
So I think the earned media, to me, is more valuable and the superior part. I think the paid media has a place. If there's all you can do, you don't have a budget, and you have a very minuscule budget, and you can produce some paid media opportunities, but you really have to shift quickly, because the problem I see with the paid media is the sphere of influence is very limited, number one. Number two, you're writing yourself, you're writing about the technology yourself. So you're not getting that explanation, you're not getting that smoothing out of the edges, perhaps, or the core, getting the message more mass appeal. And no matter what you sell, you really need everyone to understand you, not just the technical people who are going to implement it. Unless you're making something that nobody else cares about, right? But mostly if you're making product. The third problem is that there are only so many paid media channels that you can be looping through. And I found that there's not the kind of breadth of opportunity. So you could get an article placed, But what I really enjoyed the opportunities that you brought, which were ranging from the Tech Forbes multiple CEO founders talking about one problem to just our CEO talking about an in-depth topic. Then again, on the other publications, the fact that there was a wide variety of publications, and these are picked up by people who are assessing whether they're going to appeal to their readership. So there's one more gate of assessment, and there is some kind of feedback when you come back to us and say, well, that piece didn't do well because I think we were too narrow. And then the next opportunity comes and we open it. Now, the problem with paid media is they're going to take what you give them. So there is some quality and they'll ask you to do some things, but it's not that kind of two levels of quality control where you're number one gating us and saying, no, this doesn't make any sense. We need to explain it simpler. And then the editor of that publication says, no, wait, this is not quality for us.
Right. It is a double-edged sword very much.
Yes.
They will publish exactly what you give them. Because they don't have the familiarity with you enough to even push back, even if they wanted to, which they probably don't want to because they're afraid of losing the payment. And that's really what they're about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think, I have used it, the paid media, as I mentioned to you a few startups ago, and it had a purpose and it had a quick value for us because we didn't have much time in that space. But, if I have the time, I will always do earned media, definitely. That would be my first choice. But as a marketer, this, you have to test and try, and you have to do many things. Different times call for different tunes, and then you say, okay, in this circumstance I do this, and in this circumstance I do this. But it was really an amazing journey with you, and I really enjoyed every minute of it.
Well, I can say the same for you, and I learned so much working with you. And honestly, some of those lessons I'd like to articulate further in another vlogcast. So I hope to have you on the show again.
Absolutely. This is my favorite subject, marketing, PR. What could be better, right? And we used to have such long conversations even when we were working together. So absolutely, anytime. Happy to be on the call again, be on your vlog again.
Okay, thank you so much. And Sonya, if someone wanted to find out more about you, look at your own thought leadership, and I know you also you do a lot of public speaking as well. So how can someone find you online?
LinkedIn would be the best because I actually share all the pieces that I have, most of them on my LinkedIn profile. But they can also follow me on Twitter at Sonya Pelia. And reach out from LinkedIn. I'm an open connector and I'm always happy to answer a non-sales call.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and we will have you on the show again. And you've been listening to the Mind Meld PR vlog. I'm your host, Jonathon Narvey. I've been speaking with Sonya Pelia, and I will see you on the vlog again very soon.
You can count on it. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.